I was also informed by several teachers that Birgit was suspected of stealing from the local newsagent and school. At first, I could not believe it, but the police were involved. I questioned her, explaining that there was no need to do something like that. I suppose she was emulating some of her friends. Later I heard them arguing over this issue, and when listening to my secretly recorded tapes, I discovered that I was not meant to know about their ungainly activities, including the police warnings they were both subjected to. This was yet another matter of concern, which greatly saddened me. It looked as if they were in competition with each other, for Annette had the tendency to challenge her sister at every opportunity. Following my surprise recordings, I discovered Birgit crying after Annette told her that no boys would like her, as she was an ugly girl and simple. Children can be very cruel indeed, and Annette delighted in hurting with words, as this was also her natural behavior. Many times, discovering my sadness, although I always tried to show no such emotions, Birgit asked her sister why she hurt Daddy again. Annette usually shrugged her shoulders and muttered, "I don't know." Some time ago, I bought a cassette tape recorder with a radio for Birgit's birthday, and she was extremely happy about it. A great joy was streaming from her. I too felt as happy for this wonderful child, who was evidently very joyful. Her beautiful eyes expressed her excitement under her well-defined eyebrows, and for a young child she looked very charming and very photogenic. I felt I had to paint her portrait in oils, or draw her image in pencils, like my other works of art. Her childhood innocence needed to be captured, and in a sense eternalized. She happily started to record her favorite songs and contemporary tunes. In fact, I still have one of her cassette recordings. Unfortunately, she had the tendency to record another song before the previous one had finished, without any pause in between. However, it was her handiwork, and that was valued. She was enjoying her new toy, and often sang with it. I recently discovered her recording of me playing the keyboards. I wondered if she had listened to them at all. All her schoolwork, assignments, paintings, and carvings, as well as her diary, have been kept safe with me. I have saved all my children's school memorabilia proudly. Unfortunately, I do not have much of clothes, for his mother kept him away, and I am convinced that she did not value nor save any of his memories, probably discarding them as garbage. However, every time I looked at this memorabilia, like their photographs and sound recordings, all the memory is once more refreshed, and everything sad or happy is recalled. I kept all their images, the same as their mother's photos, film recordings, and Birgit's handwritten notes. One day Birgit brought home a large Kiss poster displaying her favorite artists in the heavy metal scene, and stuck it on the wall. When I removed it, I told her that it would be better if we framed it, but she was very unhappy about me removing it, for I was sure that she did not understand me at the time. Nevertheless, I framed it, but never had a chance to give it to her. Maybe one day, when and if I ever see her, I might pass it on to her. However, I was not sure how she had come by it. Did she buy it from her pocket money, or was it stolen? Annette told me that she took it from one of the shops and walked off with it. But since Annette had the habit of telling imagined stories, it was not easy to believe her. Even some years ago, when a police officer brought Annette home from a camping trip with the school, she exclaimed that everybody was telling lies about her, stealing small items from a souvenir shop, and even the police were apparently lying. They were her childhood adventures, but I would feel happier if she did not steal anything under all that peer pressure. I feel the need to explain minor details of this next memory. One day, Annette came home with an idea suggested by the teachers that students get some work experience over the school holidays. Soon, they were to complete their high school education, and if successful, were going to be eligible for higher education, possibly study at a university. She was among those who preferred not to continue, and therefore was encouraged to consider an apprenticeship towards employment. She even mentioned about some of her friends wanting to go into the escort service. However, before the term was over, she was recommended to undertake work experience and prepare a report about it as one of her assignments. She insistently wanted to get a job as an escort, but since she loved McDonald's food so much, I suggested that maybe we should consider such an experience during the next 2 weeks at their local branch in Glenhuntly Road, and she appeared happy about it. I contacted the restaurant's manager regarding the school assignment, and they were happy to employ Annette for a short period of time. The following morning I took her to the restaurant and introduced her to the staff. After her first day, she felt very tired, but reasonably happy. At end of the week, she complained that I was a slave driver, making her work. She said she hated work, and quoted what her friends suggested. There are easier ways to make money. The following week she wanted to take more time for herself. This experience was to give the students a taste of what work could be like, hopefully assisting them towards independent living. A few weeks later she was still accusing me, wanting her to become my slave. It was never my intention, and if she could earn money from this, it would remain completely hers. She obviously felt the need to accuse someone, and I happened to be an easy target. What had happened to the once upon a time, often smiling, happy child she used to be? I could no longer explain anything to her. She kept shouting at me with her ugly expletives, and accusing me that I must have felt really happy when she worked so hard, like a slave. This was very hurtful, and yet I declined to say anything. Birgit kept repeating herself, "But Annette, you're hurting Daddy," upon which Annette always shrugged her shoulders and uttered one single word, "So?" She often loudly told Birgit about how much she hated her dad. I'm still hoping that one day they will all understand how much hurt it caused. This was a time when my own health was scaring me, developing infections, blockages, and experiencing pain with the inability to pass water at ease. I was devastated. This also brings some other memories to the fore. In fact, I wished that those events never happened, but they did. When I was staying at the Boy Morris address of another friend who was managing the Natura stores in Melbourne a long while ago, Annette was literally and cunningly abducted by so-called friends who had invited us to their country estate, where they wanted me to remain and teach their children art. However, as mentioned elsewhere, I needed to go for my hospital appointment. Annette insisted on staying with her new friend, who was about her own age, and their daughter, just for another day as a school holiday treat. When I returned to pick her up, there was no sign of anybody, and panicking, I contacted the police. Those so-called friends belonged to yet another cult, although calling themselves the Children of God, and sometimes the Family. I was unsure whether they were telling me the truth. They were also members of the Victorian Spiritualist Union and close friends with Lucy Verstegen, who used to play the piano during their hymn singing at their Sunday services, When the child was found, she was at her mother's flat in one of the western suburbs of Melbourne. Those cult members in country Victoria had also utilized a form of brainwashing, a form of hypnosis, or even drugs could be considered. Repeating myself, I'm not accusing or blaming others, only observing the peculiar circumstances. However, the discovery of them being ex-Jehovah's Witnesses was a concern, although I cannot vouch how true this information was. During the police search for Annette, I was shattered. When she was found and we met at the court, she was showing signs of extreme fear, resenting me as she had been conditioned to. It was like the icing on the top. I still wonder whether this had anything to do with her behavior during her last days with me. Going forward in time, during our final days in Elwood, one evening after supper, relaxing and listening to classics, Annette stood in front of me in the lounge room, followed by Birgit, who was telling her sister not to say anything like that to Dad. At first, I thought they wanted me to show them the accidentally taking photographs of her with one of her boyfriends, when extraordinarily close to each other, as if they were preparing to make love in front of the house, and which Birgit discovered. Originally experimenting with my new long lens, I was intent on capturing images from a distance to test the optical capabilities of my camera. I still keep them as her memories. I had no chance to show them anything, because Annette had yet another of her shocking tantrums. Frankly, I was very fearful of her, for she was quite capable of creating colorful scenarios. Who knows, maybe she was planning to try and offer me one of her special coffees again. One could not even begin to guess what she had been dreaming. She had never been like that before, when I normally took her pictures. She was very happy, whereas her current attitude towards me was nothing short of pure hatred. She put her hands on her hips, standing in front of me, loudly exclaiming, "Dad, Dad, do you know I can get you put behind the bars?" I was shocked and speechless. She raised her voice and repeated her words again. I could not believe my ears. I thought I was not hearing it right. Could not even ask her why she suggested something like that. But she answered my silent question nevertheless. "Do you know how?" she asked with an evil grin on her face. "It is so easy." And so saying left the room in haste. What had she been imagining? What evil had I done to deserve her hatred? Birgit stood next to my chair, as if wanting to comfort me, yet I might have been wrong thinking like this. She said, "Annette was talking about this for some time now, Dad. I asked her to tell you what she was telling me, if she had the guts. I asked her why my own daughter, who I cared for, could think something like that. And in answer she said, 'She hates you, Dad. She really hates you. She said you don't care for her. She thinks you are a slave driver.'" Hearing her sister telling me things like that, Annette shouted from her room, "I hate you too, Birgit. I hate you for telling that man what I told you." I now knew that I had lost my daughter for good. I knew that my daughter was only capable of hating everybody as per her natural tendencies. Was it not the same with her beloved mother? Who knows what she had been conditioned into? Was it the side effect of the hallucinogens she was given by her friends? I could not imagine Magda being so wicked as to tell her such ugly things about me, although she hated me thoroughly, without naming it as hate. Remember, hatred was their love. I also knew that some of Annette's school friends talked degradingly about their parents. Besides, it was fashionable for teenagers to do so. Parents were so ignoramus and stupid, were they not? Annette always wanted to be the most important individual, telling her friends that she had the same experiences as them, without it being so. For instance, when friends said that their father was promoted, she immediately told them that her father was also promoted, without it being true. If someone spoke of their mother having cooked a nice dinner, she would immediately declare the same. She never wanted to appear any less than her peers. However, if some of her friends exclaimed something like, "You can never trust men," she had to accept it as her reality. This was a trend she shared with her mother. After years of associating with Magda as husband and wife, I can safely say this is the absolute truth. Taking this into account, I thought that perhaps Annette was reflecting what her friends were feeding her with when she made such a suggestion, asking me if I knew how she could have me put behind bars. I heard Birgit ask her how she was intending to do that, and in answer she shouted at me exactly what she told her sister. "You will see." From then on, Annette's eyes were full of hatred towards me. They were like hot coals, directed at my person. In fact, I felt she literally wanted to kill me. Strangely enough, I had a very distinct feeling about it. Obviously, she was extraordinarily angry and disappointed with me for letting her work at McDonald's for a few days, and for not allowing her to sleep with a number of boys. Annette was hardly talking to me now, and most of her stories were relayed to me via Birgit. She was using her sister as a go-between. It looked so familiar, and regrettably I had experienced it 4 times. On the other hand, in regard to her previous inquiry, I told her that if she had a baby, she had to be responsible for the child. Besides, it was too early for her to think along those lines, and perhaps she should talk to her mother about it first. I had a feeling that she had lost a fetus recently at a very early stage of its development, but I might be wrong. I knew for certain that some of her friends had similar experiences, but I was not meant to know. Remember, men are meant to be very thick, and parents in particular would never understand a thing. Was I wrong thinking this way? I sincerely hoped that I was. It was exceedingly painful to hear her claim that I was using her like a slave. I could never understand this attitude, for I never forced her to do anything against her will. I have never forced her to work and give me any single cent she earned. In fact, I have never asked her to pay me anything, although some parents expected their daughters and sons to pay something towards their upkeep. I always preferred to be gentle with them, for I loved my children, and they were my world. Obviously, I was never appreciated. I sincerely believed her absolute hatred towards me was because I had not allowed her boyfriends to stay overnight in her bed, or her wish to do escort service for work experience, as some of her friends suggested. She was heavily influenced by the constant bombardment of me being evil due to being disfellowshipped. She kept active life behind closed doors. That is, if I had not been fed with lots of lies. At one of those rare opportunities, I asked her why she wanted me to go behind bars, and what good would it do to her. She always answered me with, "Because," while shrugging her shoulders, and I could not get any other word from her. Birgit would often finish her sentences with, "Annette hates you, Dad?" When I asked her why she hated me so much, and what wrong did I do to deserve her hatred, she habitually shrugged her shoulders, repeating, "You'll see." In a different time frame, one heard Birgit tell her sister, "Because all your friends hate their dads, you just want to hate your dad too, Annette?" As usual, Annette answered her with, "So?" One asks why her friends hated their fathers. Perhaps she was fantasizing that all her friends hated their fathers because they were men who were, as usual, portrayed as being incapable of doing anything right, unintelligent, uneducated, and unsophisticated people. Although one or two of her friends had complained about their dads not being very nice people, but did they by any chance know what was wrong with them? If they were divorced, perhaps their mothers were unhappy with their husbands, complaining how badly they were treated. And unfortunately, we have heard so many stories like that. But it did not mean that they were all terrible people. What if it was because her special friends were not allowed to have their own way? Annette could not be any less than them, could she? She too had to suffer the same as her friends. It was quite clearly the in thing. I wished she would grow out of it and be awakened from her hypnotic trance, which was adversely affecting her, making her fantasize things, but I still loved her as my daughter. Her mother's forever complaints about her father, the unfaithful liar, had a strong impact on Annette's consciousness. All her father's sacrifices to make a broken family unit work were now forgotten, for her freshly conditioned mind always had to be right. Everybody spoke against their fathers, and although she exclaimed how much she hated her mother, she was unconsciously conditioned that her mother spoke only the truth, for, as a Jehovah's Witness, she could never lie. The witnesses always presented themselves as ambassadors of the only truth, and therefore their mother had to be right at all times. Annette was bombarded from every conceivable corner to hate her father, and, in truth, it was like biting off the hand which fed her. I could not blame the poor girl, because from a very young age she was encouraged to turn against me at every opportunity. It was fashionable for the young to hate their parents, and so what else could one expect her to do? She needed to hate someone, and it had to be me, for not fulfilling her dreams. I cannot forget her attempts to reward me by adding those special ingredients, particularly after her abduction, by those supporters of Jehovah's Witnesses who conditioned her young mind to their own framework of righteousness, and there was enough evidence to prove it. After she was taken to Magda, her abductors claimed it was far better for Annette to stay with her mother without knowing the reality of things. In their small minds, they were punishing me for not accepting their offer to join their circle. Magda was so thankful to her God Jehovah for bringing her daughter back after her abduction all that time ago, so that the child could be disciplined in accordance with Bible principles as they interpreted. Alas, my medical appointment at the hospital was seen as an evil thing on my part, and they claimed I could have left it to another time. But medically I needed to have those treatments no matter what those so-called friends thought. I was not going to make any apologies for that. Under those circumstances, my panicking and contacting the police was a very natural thing to do, as expected of any caring parent. I remember how that red-bearded man with a shotgun threatened the detectives I went with. They were also going to keep the large speakers I once built, which they wanted to audition. Eventually, they were returned to me. It was all because my loving daughter demanded to stay with her friend when I had to attend my medical appointment. As the whole story was reported in the media, we became famous. A month and a half later, when Annette was discovered displaying her disgust towards me at the court hearing when being returned back to my custody, she was never the same. I can still see how she buried her snotty nose in her mother's skirt, while occasionally looking in my direction extremely anxiously and fearfully, making me feel completely rejected. Later it was confirmed that the cult to which her abductors belonged have been utilizing mind transformation techniques. In other words, a specifically formulated hypnosis to make children do their bidding, where adults and children share equal relationships with each other. I mentioned a little of this elsewhere. Who knows what she had been influenced with? I deeply regretted accepting that invitation and my undermined trust in those so-called friends. Was it perhaps so organized all along by Magda's beloved brothers and sisters to get the child away from me? Even today, it remains an enigma. What a huge change it was with Annette since the days of her being a very amicable and sweet young child. Now, what she presented was an intolerable degree of complete hatred. What had the world done to her that she became so resentful about everything? What indeed did I do wrong to cause her current bitterness? It seemed I had caused much harm to her by her alleged standards and stopping those boyfriends from spending the night with her, which she interpreted as if I did not care for her well-being. I knew that if I let her stay with her mother from this point on, it might have been far better for all parties, but the girl was full of fabrications in regard to her mother, although in reality she preferred her mother above everything else, and I was the everlasting foreigner. By unbiased observation alone, one can clearly see that she never accepted nor ever appreciated me, as she was completely void of understanding, but always ready to accuse everybody around her with the ugliest things one could imagine. Ever since her infant years, she often emphasized whatever she dreamt as being true, while I felt obliged to appear to agree with her unreal dreams, where appropriate, in order to help her feel happy. She loved telling made-up stories, believing it made her appear interesting to her friends. In other words, there was a disorder which I hoped she would grow out of. Long before she became a hateful teenage girl, she used to come with me when I visited friends in the city. Some of those good friends were Polish migrants who had a bistro opposite the museum and central library on Swanston Street, which they called Museo Bistro. I painted their baby boy's portrait in a contemporary style, and they were thrilled beyond words. They were very friendly with Annette, and she received many gifts from them in the form of food. Her favorites were, of course, chocolates and the like, but after they moved to Sydney, we lost contact. I hope they are still happy after all these years. What else could one expect from my daughters, I wondered. When I thought back about what Annette told me in regard to her desire to get me put behind bars, it ran chills along my spine. I felt frozen and saddened, not knowing how to react, let alone how to deal with it. Although at the time I thought that this was a passing trend, the worst was yet to come, because as far as one could observe, nothing better could be expected from then on. Annette continued to display her complete hatred towards me, and I could no longer communicate with her for a very long while. It seemed that she was determined to destroy my life completely in respect to her mother's wishes. Indeed, what Magda had been praying for many months was now becoming the dreaded reality through her beloved daughter. If she knew what had been experienced, would she advise her daughter how not to behave, or would she perhaps feel triumphant? Unfortunately, her favorite daughter, Birgit, openly displayed characteristics influenced by seemingly Bible principles, but I pretended not to notice. Occasionally I heard Annette utter words like, "I wish he was not my father," or "I wish he was dead." I also heard her say, "I know he is not my real dad," and "I'm sure he is not related to me. I cannot be his daughter." One can guess how it made me feel. I had the very distinct feeling that she was advised to do something nasty and get away with it because of her young age. What harm was she planning to do in her extremely naive mind? I believe even Birgit was knowledgeable of this. Frankly, I was constantly on edge, thinking that they would commit themselves to do the unthinkable while I slept, causing me many sleepless nights for a long time. From then on, I decided to change my life for good, and for the better. The very best thing for me was to put aside all my memoirs in regard to a dreamt-of family, my parenthood, and raising happy children, burying them in the past, never to consider any of them again. And yet, I was not going to destroy the memorabilia they left behind. I felt the need to write my entire story for all to read and hopefully understand what life circumstances exist in the human world. Alas, this became my own wretched story of life. Due to being subjected to enormous stress levels, as well as other genetic considerations, my health began to suffer more. I developed mild duodenal ulcers and had barium meal tests, among other minor medical concerns, but was determined to heal my condition quickly, whilst also putting up with a small hernia in the groin area, needing to be under observation, and thought I was breaking to pieces. Several treatments later, I was free from such medical traumas, but as if I had not enough problems, I endured further inflammations with my urinary system, and it started to worry me even more. Was it something I needed to experience for whatever reason? I am convinced that Magda and her associates would consider it as their prayers being answered, and their God punishing me for my grave sins. That was a genetic disorder I had never been completely aware of. Several tests later, it was diagnosed that this could be the precursor towards possible prostate cancer, and was advised to keep an eye on this. One can imagine how it felt, and the stress levels I was enduring might have contributed to my ill health. My daughter's behavior made my everyday existence very traumatic. I could help myself with a positive attitude, and by supplementing my dieting. Admittedly, I became even more health-conscious and decided to add saw palmetto into my food. And soon the results started to appear promising, yet several specialists advised me to keep an eye on my prostate, and if there were any changes present in my PSA levels and frequent inflammations, to consider yearly tests. That all sounded positive, and I was more relaxed about the whole issue. In truth, I felt a little embarrassed to talk about it to any of my friends or my now ex-wife, who would completely ignore it. As far as she was concerned, I was righteously forced to feel worth nothing. I suffered in silence. Under all those circumstances, very hard to cope with Annette's behavior and her tendency towards a multi-personality complex. Imagine, for example, the way she was so willing to see me put behind bars. I was worried in the extreme, asking in my mind, what had I done to deserve such treatment? What had I neglected? Or what pain had I caused? When my children had everything they needed, and their health and well-being, their mental and emotional needs always considered above everything else, even neglecting my own health just to look after them, I was happy. I certainly was not ready for this kind of behavior. Was it perhaps part and parcel of a young human's growth? Was it something that I missed during my studies? I wished I could easily discard this morbid state of things, but how could one simply ignore all that and maintain a positive outlook? Clearly, I was not going to stop her getting to know boys, for it was her experience and choice. I did not own her. Out of the blue, she even told me that I could never stop her living her life as she wanted. As a parent, I could only try to teach her what was right and what was not. In reality, we can only teach them about the ideal things we are cognizant of, but we can never live our lives through them. They have their own lives to live. However, I did not desire her to experience pregnancy issues at that tender age. I could not talk about it in the same way as her mother needed to, but I did not have any real communication with Magda under the cultist restrictions she was obliged to follow.